The city was a monster of steel and concrete, and to Matteo and Isabella, it was a cage. 18 years old, twins and orphans, they navigated its indifferent streets like ghosts, their existence a fragile secret whispered only to each other. They were two halves of a single soul, bound by a shared past of unspeakable tragedy and a present lived in the constant gnawing fear of discovery. Their parents, vibrant and full of laughter, had been stolen from them in a storm-swept bus crash on a winding mountain road in Oaxaca, leaving them adrift in a world that suddenly had no color. A distant, well-meaning aunt had brought them to the United States, a land she promised was flowing with golden opportunity. But the gold was just the glint of streetlights on wet pavement, and the opportunities were behind doors they could not open. She too was gone now, taken by a swift and silent illness, leaving the teenage twins utterly alone in a nation that saw them not as children who had suffered, but as illegal aliens. The words were as sharp and ugly as the broken glass that littered the alley behind their building. They lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that had long been forgotten by the city's grace. The paint peeled in long, tired strips, the pipes groaned with a mournful finality, and the sirens were a constant, nightly lullaby. This tiny, crumbling space was their fortress and their prison. Here, they were not illegal. They were just Matteo and Isabella. Matteo was the anchor. He carried the weight of their survival on his young shoulders, his face set in a permanent expression of grim determination. He had his father's hands, strong and capable, but his eyes held a weariness that belonged to a much older man. He worked as a busboy and dishwasher at the Starlight Diner, a greasy spoon where the coffee was burnt and the tips were thin. He worked double shifts whenever he could, his body aching with a fatigue so deep it settled in his bones. Every greasy plate he scrubbed, every floor he mopped, was a small payment toward their dream, a life without fear. Isabella was the light. She had their mother's smile, a radiant thing that could momentarily chase away the shadows in their cramped apartment. But her light was dimmed by the constant anxiety that churned in her stomach. She worked at the Sleepwell Motel, a grim, transient place on the edge of the highway, cleaning rooms that held the sad stories of lonely travelers. Her boss, a sour man named Mr. Petrov, paid her in cash, far below minimum wage, and held her undocumented status over her head like a guillotine. He knew she was powerless, and he exploited it with a casual cruelty that chipped away at her spirit. Their shared dream was a desperate, beautiful thing. They saved every possible dollar, hiding the crumpled bills in a loose brick behind their stove. The money was for a lawyer, for a chance at legal status, for college. Matteo wanted to be an engineer, to build things that were strong and would not break. Isabella wanted to be a social worker, to help other families who were lost in the shadows, just as they were. Their dream was a fragile flame in the face of a hurricane, and they protected it with every fiber of their being. They were each other's everything. His strength was her shield, and her hope was his fuel. Without each other, the monster of the city would have swallowed them whole long ago. One Tuesday in late autumn, the sky wept a cold, relentless rain. The city was slick and gray, its mood matching the twins' own exhaustion. They were walking home together, a nightly ritual that was the best part of their day. They shared a single tattered umbrella, their shoulders pressed together for warmth. They were tired, hungry, and soaked. Another day, closer to paying the rent, but no closer to their dream. As they turned onto their street, a jarring sight stopped them in their tracks. A car, a sleek black luxury sedan that looked as out of place as a diamond in a dustbin, was stopped awkwardly at the side of the road. A woman, elegantly dressed in a cashmere coat that was now dark with rain, was struggling with a flat tire. She was getting nowhere, her manicured hand slipping on the wet lug wrench. Standing beside her, huddled under a small, inadequate umbrella, was a little boy of about 8, his face pale with cold and fear. The people of their neighborhood, accustomed to struggle and wary of outsiders, walked by without a second glance. A few men on a stoop watched with detached amusement. The city's indifference was a tangible force, a cold wall around the woman and her son. Matteo and Isabella looked at each other. They saw not a rich woman with a fancy car, but a mother with a scared child stranded in the rain. It was a universal language they understood perfectly. "We should help," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible over the downpour. Matteo nodded. It wasn't even a question. He remembered his own father, a man who could fix anything, stopping on a dusty road in Mexico to help a family whose truck had broken down. His father had expected nothing in return. It was simply what a good man did. They approached the car cautiously. "Ma'am," Matteo said, his voice gentle, "do you need some help?" The woman, whose name was Evelyn, looked up, startled. She saw two Hispanic teenagers, their clothes damp and worn, and her first instinct was to clutch her purse tighter. The city had taught her to be wary. I have a flat tire," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My roadside assistance is taking forever." Matteo didn't wait for a further invitation. He handed the umbrella to Isabella. "Here, take this. I can look at it." He knelt in the grimy puddle, the cold water immediately soaking through the knees of his thin jeans. He examined the tire and the jack. He had watched and helped Mr. Garcia, the old mechanic who used to live in their building, work on cars. He knew the basics. While Matteo assessed the situation, Isabella's attention went to the little boy. His name was Leo. He was shivering, his big brown eyes fixed on his mother's panicked face. Isabella knelt so she was at his level. "Hi there," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "That's a very nice umbrella." The boy just stared at her. "My name is Isabella. What's yours?" "Leo," he whispered. "It's okay to be scared, Leo," she said softly. "Cars are loud and rain is wet. But my brother, he's very good at fixing things. He'll have you on your way in no time." She saw a discarded, rain-soaked newspaper on the ground. An idea sparked. She picked up a relatively dry piece and, with quick, nimble fingers, began to fold it. It was a trick her own mother had taught her to chase away her tears as a child. A few seconds later, a small, perfect origami bird sat in her palm. "For you," she said, handing it to him, "to keep you company." Leo's eyes widened in wonder. He took the paper bird, his small fingers tracing its delicate wings. A tiny, hesitant smile touched his lips. He looked from the bird to Isabella, his fear beginning to recede, replaced by a childlike curiosity. Evelyn watched this quiet, tender interaction, and the wall of suspicion she had built around herself began to crumble. She saw the boy, her brother, working diligently in the filthy water, his brow furrowed in concentration. She saw the girl, his sister, calming her son with a simple, selfless act of kindness. There was no guile in them, no ulterior motive. They were just good. Matteo managed to loosen the stubborn lug nuts and properly position the jack. It was hard, wet work. His hands were numb with cold, and a cut on his knuckle from the diner was stinging fiercely. But he didn't stop. He worked with a silent, focused intensity that Evelyn found deeply impressive. Within 15 minutes, the flat tire was off, and the small spare was securely in its place. He stood up, wiping his grimy hands on his already dirty jeans. "There," he said, breathing a little heavily. "It's just a spare, so you shouldn't drive on it too fast or too far. But it will get you to a service station." Evelyn was overwhelmed with gratitude. The relief was so immense it made her feel lightheaded. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done." She immediately reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She took out all the cash she had. 3 $100 bills. "Please," she said, trying to press the money into Matteo's hand. "You have to let me pay you. For your time. For your kindness." Matteo instinctively pulled his hand back, a shocked expression on his face. "No, ma'am," he said quickly. "We can't take that." "Please," Evelyn insisted. "You're soaked. Your hands are bleeding. You deserve it." Isabella stood up and came to her brother's side. "Our parents taught us to help people because it is the right thing to do, not for a reward," she said, her voice soft but firm. Her English was clear and articulate. "We are just happy that you and your son are safe now." Evelyn was stunned into silence. She had lived her entire life in a world where every action had a price, every favor, an expectation of return. The purity of their integrity was something she had rarely encountered, especially not here, in a neighborhood she had been taught to fear. She looked at these two young people, standing in the rain, their faces illuminated by the passing headlights. They had next to nothing, that much was clear. Yet they possessed a richness of character that she realized was priceless. "What are your names?" she asked, desperate to have something to hold on to, some way to remember them. Matteo and Isabella exchanged a quick, nervous glance. Their ingrained caution, the instinct of the undocumented, kicked in. They were not supposed to be noticed. They were supposed to be ghosts. "It was no problem," Matteo said, sidestepping the question. "You should go now, before the rain gets worse. Be safe." And with a final, shy smile from Isabella, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the gray curtain of rain, leaving Evelyn standing on the sidewalk with her son, her money still in her hand, and a profound sense of awe in her heart. She hadn't gotten their names. All she knew was that she had been helped by two young Hispanic angels in a forgotten corner of the city. As she got her son back in the car, the little paper bird clutched in his hand, she knew she could not let this go. An act of kindness this pure could not simply be allowed to vanish into the night. The drive home for Evelyn Hayes was a blur. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers seemed to be counting out the beats of her own astonished heart. Her world was one of carefully constructed comfort, of philanthropy conducted from boardrooms and fundraising galas. The raw, unvarnished goodness she had just witnessed felt more real and impactful than any $1 million donation she had ever overseen. When she walked into her sprawling, minimalist home, a place that felt more like an art gallery than a house, she was still trembling. Her husband, Marcus Hayes, found her in the kitchen, staring into space. Marcus was a legend in the tech world, a reclusive genius who had built a digital empire, and then, to the shock of many, had stepped away from it all to focus on his Second Chance Foundation. He was a man who had grown up with nothing, a scholarship kid who had outsmarted and outworked everyone. He was notoriously private, almost a myth, and he valued one thing above all else: character. "Evelyn, what's wrong?" "Leo said the car broke down," he said, his voice a low rumble. He was a tall man with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Evelyn told him everything. She described the rain, her panic, the indifference of the passers-by. She described the two teenagers who had appeared like an apparition. She told him about the boy, kneeling in the filthy water without hesitation, and the girl, who had calmed their frightened son with a smile and a paper bird. And then she told him about the money. "I tried to pay them, Marcus. I offered them $300, and they refused. The girl said, she said their parents taught them to help people because it was the right thing to do." Marcus was silent for a long moment, processing the story. He walked over to Leo, who was carefully placing the now dry origami bird on his nightstand. He looked at the simple, folded piece of newspaper as if it were a precious artifact. "They had nothing, I could tell," Evelyn continued, her voice filled with wonder. "Their clothes were worn, they were so thin. And yet, they had this dignity, this absolute integrity. And I just let them walk away. I don't even know their names." Marcus turned back to his wife, and she saw a look in his eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. It was a fire, a fierce determination. "Then we'll find them," he said. It was a simple statement, but coming from Marcus Hayes, it was a vow. He had built an empire on finding needles in digital haystacks. Finding two kind-hearted teenagers in a city of millions was just a different kind of problem to be solved. He mobilized the resources of his foundation, not the public-facing side, but the quiet, incredibly efficient network of private investigators and data analysts he kept on retainer. "Here's what we know," he said to his lead investigator, a sharp ex-FBI agent named David Chen. A Hispanic brother and sister, late teens. The location is the corner of 18th and Union. The time was approximately 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday. They refused a payment of $300. The girl is skilled in origami. "That's it. Find them. Be discreet. These are not criminals. They are gems. I don't want them scared off." The search began. Chen and his team descended on the neighborhood, but they quickly hit a wall of silence. In a community composed largely of undocumented immigrants, strangers asking questions were met with suspicion and fear. People didn't talk to outsiders, especially not men in suits. The shopkeepers shrugged. The residents shook their heads. The twins, who had spent their lives trying to be invisible, had succeeded all too well. Weeks turned into a month, and the trail went cold. While Marcus Hayes was orchestrating a citywide search for them, Mateo and Isabella's world was collapsing. Their brief encounter with kindness was a fading memory, eclipsed by the brutal reality of their daily struggle. The real monster in their lives was not the city itself, but a squat, balding man named Mr. Petrov. Isabella's boss at the Sleepwell Motel was a predator who fed on the fear of the powerless. He would short her hours, make her work late without extra pay, and constantly remind her how easily he could make one phone call and have her life ruined. She endured it all with a quiet stoicism, scrubbing mold from shower stalls and changing stained sheets, because they needed the money. One Friday, as she was about to leave after a grueling 10-hour shift, Mr. Petrov called her into his dingy, smoke-filled office. "There is problem," he said, his voice slick with false concern. "Guest in room 204. He say money is missing from his wallet. $100. Isabella froze. "I cleaned that room, Mr. Petrov, but I did not take anything. I would never." "He say you were only one in room after he check out," Petrov said, shrugging his shoulders in a parody of helplessness. "Very bad for business, this. Very bad." "I am not a thief," Isabella said, her voice trembling with indignation. "I cannot have thieves working for me," he said, his eyes cold and hard. "I have to let you go, and because of this problem, I cannot pay you for this past month. It is for the damages, to reputation." The injustice of it was staggering. He had invented a theft to avoid paying her 4 weeks of hard-earned wages. It was over $500, a fortune to them. It was their rent money, their food money, their hope money. "But you can't," she pleaded. "I worked for that money. We need it." "Should have thought of that before you take from guest," he said, turning back to his paperwork, dismissing her entirely. "Now get out, before I call police." The word police was a death sentence. Defeated and heartbroken, Isabella fled. She ran all the way home, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down her face. When Mateo found her crumpled in a heap on their threadbare sofa, her body racked with sobs, and she told him what had happened, he felt a rage so profound it scared him. He wanted to go down to that motel and… do what? He was as powerless as she was. Any confrontation would put them both at risk. The loss of Isabella's income was catastrophic. They were instantly on the brink. The landlord, a man with no patience for sob stories, had already been threatening to evict them for being a few days late with the rent last month. Now, they had no way to pay it at all. Despair, a thick, suffocating fog, began to creep into their small apartment. Mateo picked up more shifts at the diner, working until he was a walking zombie, his hands raw and bleeding from the constant immersion in hot, greasy water. He would come home in the dead of night to find Isabella staring blankly at the wall, the light in her eyes flickering. They ate stale bread and cheap canned soup. The vibrant dream they had nurtured for so long was shriveling, dying from a lack of oxygen. One night, Mateo came home to find an eviction notice taped to their door. They had 5 days. He slumped against the wall in the hallway, the piece of paper in his hand feeling as heavy as a gravestone. He had failed. He had worked until he broke, and it wasn't enough. He couldn't protect his sister. He couldn't keep their fragile home together. The city, the monster, was finally going to swallow them. He slid down the wall and put his head in his hands, the utter hopelessness of their situation washing over him in a cold, crushing wave. It's in moments like these, when hope seems like a distant memory, that we often question the nature of the world. Do good deeds really matter? Is integrity just a luxury for those who can afford it? Matteo and Isabella showed selfless kindness to a stranger, and in return, their world has fallen apart. What does this say about the way things work? We'd be so grateful if you would share your thoughts on this in the comments. Do you believe that kindness eventually finds its reward, even when it seems like all is lost? And have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you were at rock bottom, only to have something unexpected change everything? Tell us your story. Your experiences create a community of hope right here on this channel. Please, also take a moment to like this video and subscribe so you can see how this story ends. We'd love to know your age and where you're watching from too. Your support allows us to continue bringing these narratives to light. The 5 days granted by the eviction notice passed in a blur of quiet desperation. The small apartment, once their sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. They packed their few belongings into 2 worn cardboard boxes, their parents' faded photographs, a handful of books, their threadbare clothes. Every object was a reminder of a life that was about to be scattered to the winds. They spoke little, the space between them filled with a heavy, unspoken grief. They had no family to call, no safety net to catch them. They would be on the streets, another tragic, invisible story in the heart of the uncaring city. On the final day, the day they were to be evicted, they sat together on the floor of the empty living room, watching the last of the afternoon light fade through the grimy window. Hope was gone. The flame had been extinguished. Meanwhile, across the city, David Chen, Marcus Hayes' lead investigator, was nursing a cold coffee in a small corner bakery. He had been chasing ghosts for weeks with no success. He was about to recommend to Marcus that they abandon the search. But he decided to try one last time. He showed a photo of the origami bird, Leo had let him photograph it, to the elderly woman behind the counter. The woman, Mrs. Flores, squinted at the photo. "Ah, the little paper bird," she said, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Isabella. She used to make those for my grandchildren." Chen's heart leapt. "Isabella? Do you know her? Her and her brother?" Mrs. Flores' friendly demeanor instantly became guarded. "Why are you asking? Are they in trouble? They are good children, very good children. They have had too much trouble in their lives already." Chen knew this was his only chance. He put away his professional, intimidating persona and spoke from the heart. "My employer is not the police," he said softly. "He was the one they helped. The man whose wife and son were stranded in the rain. He wants to find them to thank them. He wants to help them. I promise you, Mrs. Flores, we only want to do something good." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for deceit. Seeing only sincerity, she finally relented. "They live in the old building on the corner, apartment 3B, she whispered. "But you must be gentle. The world has not been gentle with them." When Chen called Marcus with the address, the billionaire made an instant decision. He wasn't going to send an emissary. He wasn't going to delegate this. Some things required a personal touch. "I'm going myself," he told a stunned Evelyn. "You should come too. We started this together." The sight of Marcus Hayes' car, the same model as the one they had helped, pulling up outside their derelict building would have been a sensation on any other day. But Matteo and Isabella didn't see it. They were inside, waiting for the landlord and the sheriff to arrive. There was a knock on the door. Not the angry, impatient rap of the landlord, but a soft, hesitant knock. Matteo and Isabella looked at each other, confused. Matteo got up and opened the door, expecting to see a neighbor. Instead, he saw the woman. The woman from the car, from that rainy night weeks ago. Her face was etched with a mixture of relief and concern. Standing beside her was a tall, imposing man with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Hello," the woman, Evelyn, said, her voice gentle. "I hope we're not intruding. We've been looking for you." Matteo was speechless. His mind raced. Were they in trouble? Did they do something wrong? He instinctively moved to block the doorway, to protect Isabella, who was now standing behind him, her eyes wide with fear. The man stepped forward slightly. "My name is Marcus Hayes," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "This is my wife, Evelyn. You helped her and my son Leo a few weeks ago." The name didn't mean anything to them. They didn't follow the news of billionaires. We have to leave," Matteo stammered, thinking they were the landlord's associates. "We have our things. We are going now." "Leave?" Marcus asked, a frown creasing his brow. He looked past Matteo and saw the packed boxes, the stark emptiness of the room. He saw the eviction notice still taped to the wall beside the door, and in a flash of brilliant, painful clarity, he understood. He looked at their thin faces, the fear in their eyes, the defiant way the brother was shielding his sister, and he felt a wave of shame and anger. Shame that these two good souls were living in such dire straits, and anger at a world that would allow it. "You're not going anywhere," Marcus said, his voice now filled with an iron authority that was impossible to question. "We didn't come here to cause you trouble. We came here to thank you, and to offer you our help." Matteo and Isabella stared at him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "My wife told me what you did," Marcus continued, his gaze softening as he looked at them. "She told me how you stopped in the rain when no one else would, how you worked to fix her car, and how your sister comforted my son, and then she told me how you refused to take any money for your trouble." He took a step closer. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who want something from me. My name, my money, my influence. It's a world of transactions. But you two, you acted out of pure character. You showed integrity when you had every reason not to. In a moment of need, you gave freely, without expecting anything in return. I have built a foundation, the Second Chance Foundation, dedicated to finding young people with exactly that quality. People with immense potential and unbreakable character who have been dealt a bad hand by life. For a month, my team has been searching for you. You, Matteo and Isabella, are the very reason my foundation exists." Tears were now streaming down Evelyn's face. "Leo still has the paper bird you made him, Isabella," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "He keeps it by his bed. He calls it his lucky bird." The words finally began to penetrate the twins' shock. The fear in their eyes slowly gave way to a dawning, fragile hope. Could this be real? Could this impossibly kind, powerful man be telling the truth? "We are offering you a scholarship," Marcus said, his voice clear and direct. "A full scholarship from my foundation. That means we will provide you with the best legal team in the city to secure your immigration status. We will provide you with a new, safe place to live, and we will cover your full tuition to any university you choose, for any degree you wish to pursue. We are offering you not a handout, but a hand up, an opportunity to build the life you deserve." Isabella let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Matteo stared, his jaw slack, the tough, defensive posture he had maintained for years crumbling away to reveal the stunned, hopeful boy underneath. The landlord, the eviction, the fear, it all faded into the background, replaced by the sound of this man's impossible, life-altering offer. As Isabella began to cry, not with sorrow, but with a relief so profound it was painful, she found her voice. Emboldened by this miracle, she told them about Mr. Petrov, about the stolen wages and the false accusation. Marcus's expression, which had been so kind, hardened into cold fury. He despised bullies and exploiters more than anything. He pulled out his phone and made a single brief call to his head of legal affairs. "I have a situation at a place called the Sleepwell Motel," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I want you to use the full resources of this foundation to investigate its owner for labor violations, wage theft, and any other crime you can find. I want to make an example of him. Spare no expense." In that moment, Matteo and Isabella understood. Their lives had just been irrevocably changed. The knock on the door had not been the end. It was the beginning. The monster of the city had not swallowed them. Instead, it had delivered a miracle in the form of a grateful billionaire and the enduring echo of their parents' most important lesson, that kindness, offered freely, was the most powerful currency in the world. The days that followed were a whirlwind of surreal and beautiful change. The eviction notice on their wall became a meaningless piece of paper. The very next day, Marcus Hayes's legal team, a formidable group of lawyers who usually handled billion-dollar mergers, descended on the Sleepwell Motel. Mr. Petrov, who had built his petty kingdom on the exploitation of the voiceless, suddenly found himself facing a battery of investigators and auditors. They uncovered years of wage theft, labor law violations, and tax evasion. Within a week, his business was shut down, his assets were frozen, and he was facing a mountain of legal charges. A month later, Isabella received a check in the mail for not only her back pay, but for punitive damages, a sum of money that was more than she had ever seen in her life. She wasn't the only one. The foundation's lawyers tracked down a dozen other former employees Mr. Petrov had cheated, ensuring they all received what was owed to them. Justice had been swift, total, and deeply satisfying. Matteo and Isabella moved out of their crumbling apartment that same week. An associate from the foundation helped them find a new home. A bright, clean two-bedroom apartment in a safe, quiet neighborhood with a park across the street. For the first time, they had a dishwasher, a reliable heater, and windows that looked out onto tree-lined streets instead of a brick wall. The first night they spent there, they didn't unpack. They simply sat on the floor of the living room, a pizza box between them, and looked at each other in stunned, joyful silence. The constant, grinding fear that had been their companion for so long was gone. The silence was not heavy with anxiety. It was light with possibility. Their immigration case, handled by the best lawyers in the country, moved with astonishing speed. They were guided through the complex process, their case for asylum as orphaned minors strengthened by the full backing and considerable influence of the Second Chance Foundation. The threat of deportation, a shadow that had loomed over every moment of their lives, finally vanished. The most exciting day was when they visited the university campus with Evelyn. It was a sprawling, beautiful place, with ivy-covered brick buildings and vast green lawns where students sat reading in the sun. It was a world they had only ever dreamed of. They walked through the halls, their eyes wide with wonder. They registered for their first semester of classes, Matteo for the engineering program, his mind already buzzing with ideas for structures and systems, and Isabella for social work, her heart set on gaining the skills to help families like her own. They became part of the Hayes family's life. They had dinner at their home once a week, no longer as strangers but as cherished friends. Young Leo adored them, looking up to Matteo as a cool older brother and confiding his secrets to Isabella. Marcus and Evelyn, whose lives had been insulated by wealth, found a new sense of purpose and joy in mentoring the twins, watching them blossom now that they were free from the crushing weight of survival. 2 years flew by. Matteo and Isabella were no longer just surviving, they were thriving. They were at the top of their classes, their minds sharp and hungry for knowledge, their spirits finally unburdened. They were now legal permanent residents, with a clear path to citizenship. Their future, once a terrifying, formless void, was now a bright, open road. They had not forgotten where they came from. They couldn't. It was woven into the fabric of who they were. Isabella spent her weekends volunteering at an immigrant resource center, using her fluent Spanish and her own experiences to comfort and guide families who were lost in the same bureaucratic maze she had once navigated. She was a beacon of hope for them, living proof that a different life was possible. Matteo, in his spare time, was already working on his first major project. It wasn't for a big corporation. It was a design for a simple, low-cost water purification system, inspired by the often unreliable plumbing in his old neighborhood. He wanted to use his skills to build things that would help people, things that would last. One crisp afternoon, they were walking together across the university quad, their arms full of books, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. They were laughing about a professor's quirky lecture, their conversation easy and light. A group of prospective students and their parents were on a campus tour, and they paused to look at Matteo and Isabella, seeing in them the ideal of university life, bright, happy, and full of promise. They had no idea of the desert the twins had crossed to get there. Isabella paused and looked at her brother, her smile so bright it seemed to light up the afternoon. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "In the rain?" Matteo smiled back, the old, weary sadness completely gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, quiet confidence. "All the time," he said. "Mom and Dad would be proud." They stood there for a moment, two halves of a whole, no longer ghosts in a hostile city, but the architects of their own bright future. They had been given a second chance, but they knew it was a chance they had truly earned, not with money or power, but with the unwavering strength of their character and a single, selfless act of kindness on a dark and rainy night. Their parents' legacy was not in what they had lost, but in the goodness they had carried forward, a light that had ultimately guided them home. The story of Matteo and Isabella is a powerful testament to the idea that who you are is more important than what you have. What did you find most inspiring about their journey? Do you believe that a single act of kindness can truly change a life? We would be deeply honored if you would share your feelings and your own stories of kindness, given or received, in the comments below. Please tell us your age and the city or country you're watching from, so we can see how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up and, most importantly, by subscribing to our channel and clicking the notification bell. Every subscription helps us continue to create and share these narratives of hope, resilience, and the quiet heroism of everyday people. Thank you for being here and for being part of this community.